All right, all right, all right. Here we are, finally. The stellar roundtable on NFTs. So we are going to talk about non-fungible tokens today. I will admit it wasn't that long ago before I thought this had something to do with mushrooms or fungus. I didn't know what a fungible or non-fungible token was. That was definitely one of my most earliest Google queries. Back when I was first getting introduced to this concept. We've got a fun little discussion for the next hour or so. We've got some fantastic guests on. I'll start with myself. My name is Tyler Vanderhoeven. I'm the ecosystem evangelist at the Stellar Development Foundation. I spend my day writing documentation and doing workshops and building apps and understanding what the ecosystem, what folks like these panelists here are up to day to day. So I think I have the best job, but could be wrong. If you all can go ahead and make sure you are unmuted, and we'll go ahead and go around this proverbial round table. Maybe Steve, if you want to go first, a little bit about yourself, how you got into Stellar, and what you're up to.
Yeah, absolutely. Cheers. So my name's Steve. I'm the CEO at Task. We've got involved with Stellar more through the community fund. We've been working with Stellar for 2.5 years. Task is a system that allows organizations to connect and engage with their teams, gather information, provide rewards and incentives through to teams, and then take all that information and report back to investors and donors and the market in general. That's predominantly what we do. Got some interesting aspects about how we believe NFTs can be used, which looking forward to getting into later. And that's all. That is me.
Super, fantastic. Really excited to have you on, particularly for that less than traditional use case that we might think about when we use that word NFT. Fred, how about you?
Yeah, hi everyone, and thanks for having me. So, and also I wanted to say 안녕하세요, Jay, and all Korean still up and watching at that time. So, my name is Frédéric Rézeau. I am the founder of Lightmeet and also the owner of Stellarport. So Lightmeet is a gaming platform basically connecting gamers to the crypto world with game asset ownership, cross-currency, decentralized in-app purchases, and also a lot of other features that leverage the Stellar blockchain. So just recently, and it was live with Sam Connor on Monday, we unveiled our NFT and collectible marketplace on Stellar. And the marketplace basically was created to connect the dots between all our products to provide more synergies, and it will accept any kind of NFTs. It will be available publicly within the next few days. We are still fixing a few stuff, and yeah, I will talk about it a bit more later.
Super. Yeah, very excited to have you on board. You've been around for a long time in the NFT space. Super excited about that NFT platform. Can't wait to start playing on that. Zach, how about yourself? Stellar Zach.
Hello, hi. My name is Zach. I am the Director of Marketing at the Stellar Development Foundation, which may make you wonder why am I here to talk about NFTs on an NFT roundtable. My actual introduction to the space was actually blockchain collectibles, pre like 2018, like 2017, 2016 kind of stuff. And it's been interesting to watch the evolution of that kind of thing and the evolution of digital ownership. And I've got a lot of thoughts just generally, just having explored this before my time at SDF. And yeah, I'm excited to hear how you guys are implementing this stuff into your current solutions or use cases. So yeah.
Super. Yeah, very excited. Zach and I have a fun little history of before either of us worked at SDF. We were doing some stuff around color glyph. That's how we were introduced. Not exactly NFTs, but still the idea of crypto gaming items and memeing the internet with strange and wonderful digital items. So for our first discussion topic, I think it's good to lay a groundwork, kind of create a foundation around definitions. Where you're going to use the word NFT a lot. I think it's an acronym, but the acronym maybe has grown a bit beyond just that, or NFTs have grown a bit beyond that. Fred, I remember when you were talking with Sam Connor a couple of days ago, you touched on this a bit, that NFTs is an acronym, but it's grown beyond that a little bit. So if you can briefly touch on, when somebody says NFT, or when you think about it, what does that mean to you? What does that mean to your users? And how does that affect the way that you build Lightmint or products supporting NFTs?
Yeah, I mean, so NFTs essentially, like, yes, strict definitions, they are unique assets, and that means they are not interchangeable. But yes, the way people use the term NFTs these days is more to describe a wider range of non-fractionable assets, right? So they are not necessarily unique. And yes, this definition fits better, much better, the current use case of NFTs, which is essentially to provide proof of ownership for digital content within a decentralized world, right? So, yeah, that I think with the more and more decentralized and the more and more disengaged our digital platforms become, then the more NFTs are meaningful.
Yeah, I remember when because NFTs for me obviously kind of meant that acronym, but then I saw an auction or a sale or something that was a 1 of 10 NFT sale. I'm like, I feel like we're moving beyond what NFTs actually are, and they're starting to take on. So there's nothing wrong with a 1 of 10 sale of something, but that's not what an NFT, the acronym, is. So maybe it's starting to move beyond that. I don't know, Zach, maybe you have some thoughts around this concept of moving away from just an acronym to taking on more of an ideological ownership and freedom there.
I mean, I'll echo Fred. I mean, 100%. It's like digital ownership stuff. Early on, I mean, if you look at, I mean, outside of like colored coins and stuff, but moving into like early Ethereum collectibles, all you had were to work with was ERC20 like contracts, and you know, the stuff we were working on were modified ERC20 contracts that like tracked ownership, but they were like single, like no decimal things. So like we were thinking about things like trading cards, or like, you know, rare items and drops in video games or something like that. Like those things aren't unique in that you can, like, you'll have multiple Mickey Mantle cards in a baseball card pack, but there's only so many that exist. And so I think the acronym doesn't bother me, because before there was NFTs, that concept existed anyway. And so if we're calling them NFTs now as like the broader space term, I don't think it matters if it's a 1 of 1 or a 1 of 1,000, because the principle is the same. It's not like a currency or something else.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah, it's that digital ownership that I think is so interesting, and that being what people mean when they're talking about NFTs is taking whatever we used to mean when it was physical ownership of something and finding a way to turn that into digital ownership, where you can transfer and gain a lot of that same value, where I'm holding the one thing, or there's only 10 people in the world that have this. Somehow you can replicate that digitally, where you're not physically holding an item, but that same construct is existent. Steve, did you have something to add there?
Yeah, well, I mean, I agree with Zach in that I don't, for me, if this allows generation of limited editions, which really is the kind of 1 to 10 or 1 to 1,000, the lovely thing about NFTs is it's empowering artists again. You know, art from pictures to music and all sorts of creativity. I think when you combine NFTs with smart contracts, we're going to see a wave back. I mean, if we had digitization came in, you could copy and paste everything. We saw file sharing. If you look at the music industry, the only musicians you can see now typically are huge artists, because you make all your money going on the road. I think with the NFTs and smart contracts and the way in which you can start to reward people, we can go back to the old kind of cottage industry of someone's in their bedroom, they're pumping out great tunes, they're making great art, and there's a way of them having a revenue stream which respects them as an artist, and they don't need to be, you know, going on the road. I think that will be really lovely to see, because it's going back to the value of art before digitization kind of took that away.
I would even take a step further and say, like, you know, the art stuff is really cool from the perspective of the artists are basically the guinea pigs in this NFT experiment. They're out there and they're putting these pieces out, and they don't know what the like long term how the format's going to treat them, like what they're going to do. But you know, they're testing the medium. But like they're there breaking grounds for, I think, things we talk about. Like there's projects in our ecosystem already that are thinking about like fractional analyzing things like real estate. But if you're just like a normal like person and you're buying like a home, you currently have to go through something like a title company and multiple parties. And there's an evolution in the future where NFTs, like an artist could create a beautiful piece, and it could be basically the digital representation of the title for a home. So you could have thing like other things represented as NFTs, like a home title or something like that. It does end up circumventing like processes right now that we have to have a title company, because the title company is the source of truth for the owners, like who owns the house or who owns the title to the house. But like NFTs, you know, that concept applies very nicely to that. And I think the artists are breaking the ground here, but the digital ownership doesn't stop just with art, and it doesn't just. And I think Fred's take like, yeah, I think you guys are obviously pushing beyond just the art stuff here as well.
Yeah, I mean, to me, one of the main use case as well of NFTs and basically being able to address the digital goods needs is the fact that if you look at the industry today, you will see, for example, in the music industry, Spotify is a platform that controls most of the paycheck of all those artists. And we have the same in the gaming industry with the App Store, the Play Store. And with this, the availability of those items outside of those platforms and on decentralized platforms, on decentralized networks, then we can really like break out from this model.
There was I just wanted to add with, you know, as you break out from that model, as you look at things like, you know, land ownership. I mean, for me, I'm very interested in that aspect of actually taking the digital certificate, having it mapping onto physical objects. I think there's a lot of potential there. But I think when people say, well, what's the point? A really easy way of summarizing it is you look at something like fake degrees. Any of us can go out on the internet. We can go and grab a fake degree of whatever. And, you know, it's not the biggest problem we have in the world, but in terms of fixing that problem with a NFT, which is, you know, simply tied to someone's domain with a TOML file with an issue, you know, an asset that's being issued. Now you've got your NFT certificate. It's very, you know, and it's, you know, you got a degree. That TOML file can be at Harvard or whatever the education institute is. You got a 2-second check. And the other bit that I think can become interesting is that can become automated. Background checks just get automated. No one needs to actually go and have a look at anything. And you could extend that further into a personality tests. So if you want to apply for a job, I complete some personality tests. I'm quite happy to open that up for someone to look at. So I'm sending NFTs, which is, you know, here's proof of my degree. Here's some personality insights to see if I'm right fit with the team. There's various other kind of digital aspects of my personality I could be putting forward. And then, you know, you almost start to get rid of HR and recruiting departments, is that automates loads of systems there. And it's not the biggest problem in the world, but I think I think there's interesting models of using NFTs in that type of way.
Yeah, it's something that's been interesting even on Stellar Quest, because we have these different challenges that people do and they earn badges, and it'll be neat. Like you don't get those badges unless you've completed the challenges, and so having those badges in a wallet that you can verifiably prove that you have ownership over is a stamp of I've gone through Stellar Quest Series 1 or Stellar Quest Series 2, and that means that I know something about Stellar because I can't get these badges any other way. That's really neat. And so the NFT is a vehicle for trust, or a vehicle for assurance for an employer to say, okay, well, we need somebody who knows Stellar. I hope they do. Oh, look, I can, as long as you can prove ownership over this account that you say you own, I can have some level of assurance. And seeing that model moved out where NFTs are a vehicle rather than only a piece of art or something that you own as the item itself, but more a vehicle towards something else, is kind of cool. So that was kind of our initial introduction to what NFTs are and how they're being used a bit in the real world today. And I think we've already touched on it a bit, but if we could transition slightly to there's so much hype and buzz and noise around NFTs. If we boil some of that away, for you all personally, what do you see the value of NFTs for the spheres and the realms that you're in? We've already started touching a little bit. Those begin to show themselves in like product use cases and the things that you all are building. But if you can touch on those a bit more in depth of what, if you scrape away the noise, what do you think will be left from NFTs in 5 or 6 years? Maybe Steve, if you want to take that one first.
Well, in 5-6 years, we will definitely be collecting NFTs, because I think as humans, we just love collecting stuff. So that, that the collectible aspect and, the getting away from the ridiculousness of buying pixels for millions of dollars, there's going to be a steady state of very happy adults and school kids collecting lots of interesting stuff because we just love doing it. So, I mean, that's great. There's that certification aspect, which I think is, personally, I find that interesting. I think it can solve a lot of problems. If you expand that certification concept in terms of who is doing what, who's doing what, which can be at an individual level, it can be at an organizational level. I think if you look at Stellar or any blockchain similar to Stellar in that mission, which is get the finances through, get financial fluidity globally, that's one problem you solve. The next problem is it going to the right person? One of the key issues that we have is finances being misdirected. I think if you combine the certification, you can start to direct finances in the right way, because you can start to get it through depending on particular certification and deciding that that's going to be the way that you would send finances through. So I think reputation and building reputation certification can work in all sorts of ways that tie and automate financial distribution. I think the other bit that I hope will be something we see in 4, 5, 6 years, and it's certainly an area that I'm interested in personally, is that if we look at the key issues we face globally, the incentive schemes don't work. And I remember a friend talking to me a couple of years ago, talking about natural assets. How can you take natural assets and convert them into investment propositions? If we accept that human greed is typically what drives things, then could you harness natural assets in a way and turn them into investment vehicles where they give financial ROI, and there's then a desire to protect, there's a desire to, whether it's reforestation, whatever it happens to be. Now, if you take the NFT and you can track that, you can use that to track physical assets, natural assets, you can then have investments into, say, forestry. There's the potential of, as you purchase younger trees, if there's evidence that they're growing, that asset goes up in value naturally over time. And if you're using it as an NFT, which is tradable, you have a natural asset which people can be trading. And I think it's an idea which I think if you can get the economics right, you could go out and start to solve some of these problems, because a lot of the problems we have are just because the incentive schemes are totally wrong. So I'm hoping that there's potential there long-term for NFTs in terms of natural asset investment.
Yeah, fantastic. I echo a lot of those sentiments personally myself. Fred, how about you?
Yeah, so I mean, there's a saying that says there's no bad publicity, right? But so I think somehow these stunts are also, they are not the ultimate use case for NFTs, but we can't stop the excitement of this part of the human nature, and then also NFTs as a much wider appeal to mainstream than cryptocurrencies, for example. So I think all this is part of it. We need to be careful to not engage into too much destructive, reckless behavior. But I think somehow there's also good side into this kind of hype and excitement around NFTs. So yeah, definitely not everyone is going to sell the first 5,000 days for 69 million, and that's definitely not the use case. But so the way I see NFTs in the like contributing to a better world is essentially being able to power a decentralized world, right? That's what I was saying just before. The ability to disengage completely from those platforms, because currently, let's say you are a game developer, the only opportunity for you to sell NFTs or sell in-app purchases is to go on the App Store, on the Play Store, on Steam, on all those centralized places, which somehow they impose their rules. And we saw, for example, with games like Fortnite, what happened when the store suddenly decides to put you out. And same for the music industry. So basically, that's the way I see NFTs powering a decentralized world of tomorrow.
Yeah. Zach?
I mean, I was just going to say, like, I'm going to take Fred's thing and what Steve says, and then I'm going to say, you said the not hype, but I feel like this is going to come off feeling a little bit like hype. So the current like situation, obviously, all this like the art trade stuff, there's a really unique thing happening where you're seeing like boutique shops now open up that are like they're like labels, I would say, if you look at the music industry or like art world, or they're like an agent where they are going out and seeking people and they're like trying to set them up with like an NFT strategy for releasing their stuff. And that's going to go away at some point. There will always be boutique stuff, but like right now, that's where the opportunity is. But as people figure out like the strategies for this themselves, it will grow. And I think, you know, what I was writing about a lot back in 2016 and 2017 was like, where are we going to go as far as like working in the future? I wasn't expecting like pandemics and stuff, but like we have this, everybody virtually now is introduced to the internet because everybody was at home for a year. And so, you know, offices may not necessarily be the same kind of thing. So you can have virtual neighborhoods, you can have virtual workspaces, you can have like this weird mash between virtual reality and augmented reality. You need to still have traditional things like people still will live in houses, people will still own cars, there will still be like things that need to be bridged from the traditional world into this world. But like I think what I've seen happen, and even going back to Fortnite, like yesterday I think Epic announced that they had gotten $1 billion in funding for something called the metaverse, which is going to be like brand Disney World, I guess, like VR brand Disney World. It'll be like Ready Player One. I see those kind of environments growing. Second Life is a great test bed experiment for virtual real estate. Like there, all this stuff, to Fred's point about like decentralized world, like that will come. It may not come in the next year, and it may not come out of this immediate cycle, but people like are definitely, I think, thinking about where to get to that point and what that means. Like, am I going to be here in 25 years? Is this a 5-year thing, a 25-year thing? Like, how long will it take for adoption, and what steps are required to make it easier? But I think there's just infinite applications. It just depends on how digital we decide to get as a people.
Yeah, it's just a comment on that. This is going off piste a little bit, so pull me back if it's going too far. But I think there's when you look at collaborative currencies, if you look at collaborative currencies which then complement a traditional currency, so you have communities that can use a currency between each other, then again, in my brain, I always see the NFT with a smart contract and being connected with some sort of inputs. The outputs can be certificates in the form of NFTs. And if you look at a collaborative currency where communities are working together, and you're looking at reputation and understanding trust between the different stakeholders within a community, then I think NFTs can come in there. If you look at that kind of absolutely digital future, decentralized future, then how do you automate reputation and understanding the different players within that community?
I have another thing that kind of goes off of that I've been chewing on recently, and that's on legality of NFT stuff and ownership. Like when I'm purchasing an NFT now, what does that actually guarantee me as far as rights? I know, platform developers have to consider copyright and like cease and desist, and there will be tools to hide things from platforms. Platforms that allow you to mint through them obviously will have terms of service that are like, hey, you can't do these things. But because of how these assets are represented on chain, like just removing them from a platform doesn't remove them from existence. And so I'm wondering if there will be a big giant lawsuit one day where you have all these collectors basically suing for rights to use art that they've purchased, and or vice versa, and what those actually guarantee. And I'm curious if like there's a whole industry for like terms of service that may need to come out of this. Like what I suspect, there will be a court case that resolves that if you put a terms of service on your NFT itself when you mint it, then that will be the legal grounds. But anything done without that, I feel like is going to have a bad time. But I don't know. What do you guys think as far as like what does owning an NFT guarantee you, Fred? I think, or Steve, or Tyler.
I mean, that's definitely something that, for example, in the Ethereum world, they started to work on that. You can see Dapper Labs. I think they started to specify a license called the NFT license. You can read it on nftlicense.org, I think, and it specifies a lot of things about this. But yeah, there's definitely a role that NFTs cannot address. So they address ownership, they don't address copyright, and you can obviously have a lot of holes there. Difficult to address.
The question to the group: what's the situation with GDPR, blockchain/NFTs? Because if you're, let's say, you're a blockchain provider, and someone decides to put personal identification information in Stellar, it would be in the memo field, what happens? Where's the blame? Where's the right to be forgotten exercise? That must have come up in conversation. I'm just intrigued to know.
Well, Fred, do you want to tackle it?
Or I'm not expert on that.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I'm not a legal counsel or anything like that. So I don't know if I necessarily have the greatest answer for you, but I think, something like we maintain like through a service that may be something like MailChimp or like Emma or whatever, like some digital database of things. That's easy to go into and remove because there's personal information identified with the service that has those tools. But with a distributed network like Bitcoin or like Ethereum or even Stellar, like what's on the network, part of using it, like, is you understand that that's what happened. It's immutable, right? So you're not like, you can't undo this stuff. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like that's probably a whole different conversation of like what happens when personal data is on the blockchain, about KYC, AML stuff to roll into. It's a big question. I don't know. I don't have an answer. I think it's tricky.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, so much of the liability there is on the entity that put that data there, but because the assumption is, or the way these laws have been written is the assumption that if you put it there, you can also take it off. And so the laws revolve around take it off, remove it, delete it. But when that assumption is no longer true, you're going to need different rules. And I don't know what those are going to be, other than I think it's probably going to boil down to you need to be really careful what you put on a blockchain, and that there's liability for you as someone having access to the blockchain, particularly less around tools like Stellar, which aren't designed for arbitrary data storage. You can put arbitrary data on there, but it's not designed for that. But my concern is more around things like IPFS and Filecoin and Arweave and these blockchains that are specifically designed for arbitrary data storage. That becomes a bigger issue where your purpose is to store arbitrary data. And so the assumption will be, I'm going to use this instead of my database. But if you don't understand what you're putting on there is immutable, you might end up in trouble.
Yeah. You know what? It leads me to believe though, like, I feel like like based on no precedent or like court cases, I can't pull anything up. I'm just pulling this out of thin air. But I feel like with the internet, everybody's just using browsers to interpret like things. Like you can have a hardcore user that like it's doing it through, I don't know, like how David uses the internet. I think is the best way. But like you can also and that's going to be very specialized, and people are aware that like there's a dark net as well. Like there's a or you can use Onion like routers, like whatever, like, but that's not the primary use. So my assumption would be just like any platform, if a primary way to display this information, like for NFTs is a great example, because NFT, like let's say an Ethereum one, that's just a smart contract. There's not an image associated with that. There's not, you have to like interpret that through whatever thing and like pull IPFS, so you're viewing it in a viewer or something like that. Most people, you know, if they can't see that or they can't view it, they're never going to see it. So I feel like that's good enough, as long as it's for a majority. I mean, I don't think that's going to settle a court case, you know, saying, oh, that's good enough, they can't see it. But I think, you know, that's kind of how the internet's treated currently. Like, you know, as a user on the internet, what acceptable use is to some degree. I feel like maybe not, maybe that's a wrong interpretation.
Yeah, it'll be interesting for sure to see how, and that to me is one of the biggest outlying. Wonder how that's going to pan out. Questions.
So, for example, the NFT license that has been specified by Dapper Labs. So they say that we can take an NFT on a marketplace as long as we can prove the ownership, that the ownership is proper before putting it on the marketplace. So I think the marketplace will have to do a lot of things in order to prevent being under a lawsuit or things like that.
When you look at the future, I mean, you're going back to, you know, Zach said about that digitized future, when it will happen. Of course, the lovely thing is when a system is invented, which is what we have with blockchain, where it's released and it can't be stopped. So with NFTs, I suppose there's that same question, which is, and Tyler, you were talking about, you know, true decentralization of NFTs the other day. You know, how do you get to that state? Now you have these, and we perhaps should talk about this, which is you do have that you're talking about. Your description was you're looking through a window. You have to go to the shop, look through the window, and look at your NFT. How do we decentralize that? The second you decentralize it, then the laws have to wrap around the NFTs and not the other way around. I mean, could you go into the opportunity for decentralization and creating that sort of system?
Yeah, so I mean, the way that almost all, if not all, NFT marketplaces work is there is that interface that you're accessing your NFTs through, and there is some where you can take your NFTs and view them on some other blockchain explorer or some other interface, but there tends to be that I can only get at this through a browser, through a particular website. And particularly when you split the NFT between the contract that allows you to sell it and the actual representation of that asset, the IPFS address or whatever it might be that actually holds the image or the art, you're beginning to centralize, or at least beginning to silo the usability of that thing to where, yeah, if your NFT is inside Ethereum, you have to look through a window, OpenSea, or look through the foundation to see your NFT. But if they decide to pull the shade on that and you view that URL and they've decided that NFT is no good anymore, you've essentially lost access to that. And so by decentralizing that, again, yeah, what you're doing is you kind of have to take the reason that they might pull the shade and address that before you ever mint it, and almost put the viewing mechanics or the access mechanics and bake that into the NFT itself. So whether that's the code to view the NFT along with the actual art for the NFT, but all of the pieces for how this thing is represented and accessed. So not just the security, and not just the trading of the thing, but the actual access to the thing, the way that you hold it and identify to those around you, look at this thing that I own, whatever that mechanic is, that has to be part of the NFT too, so that access to it is just as central to the thing itself, so that you're able to show it. But when you show it, it's also still there. It's so strange that these things are split, because if I hold a baseball card, all of that is contained in that baseball card. But when we've transferred that digitally, we've split these things up and siloed them to where each one can fail individually. And now you're holding up a baseball card, but there's no image on it. Or you're holding an image in your brain, like, no, I can see it in my head, but nobody else can access that picture by having the card that you're showing them. It's weird to think about, but that's the world that we've created when we've siloed all of these things. And we have to find ways to bring those things together, in my mind, or else invariably, you give it enough time, these things are going to be siloed, things are going to go away, and all of the things that we're purchasing and accessing now are going to be so broken that they won't have the value that they have. And there's going to be a lot of this sort of hype that goes way up. None of it's going to work, and it's going to leave that bad taste in everybody's mouth. And we're going to have to slowly crawl back up before we're able to start innovating again.
How much does that fit with, does Stellar want to fix that problem, or does it conflict too much with being fast?
So there's obviously a big difference between the Stellar Development Foundation and how we use Stellar and how we build Stellar. But Stellar itself is an open protocol that anyone can use for their purposes. So it's, if you approach Stellar and you think it can work for your purposes, go for it. I don't think it's something that SDF is going to work on. We're cross-border payments. We're open access to the world's global financial system. It's a different goal. I think there are some crossovers, particularly when you start to define what is value or what is a financial, like what is that? What does financial access actually mean? What is finance? Those things I think begin to be answered differently when it's digital. But when you look at Stellar itself, the protocol and the network and how changes are made to the ledger, the cryptography behind it, that works great for all kinds of use cases outside of this. There are certainly ones that don't fit, but if you approach the network and see that it works well for your use case, there's nobody standing in line saying, sorry, can't do that.
And I think any of this stuff, like even if SDF is not, we're not internally developing NFT standards, I think that, we're having this conversation because some of you guys are. And, I think that it would be worthwhile to see a conform standard or two for this across the platform. We've been talking about it now since I started SDF, and I've seen Fred's ideas for how he's doing it. I've seen other people working on projects. There's a couple of other marketplaces that have been launched simultaneously, and it's just been interesting to see how the conversations that have happened over 3-4 years are now starting to that work is now dropping. And it's really cool that it's dropping simultaneous to the hype cycle, because it's not like this, the work that Fred, for example, has done is new. It's not like he just spun this up because suddenly people sold stuff. It's something that he's been doing for a long time. And, some of these other projects that are also issuing NFTs on Stellar are. So I think a standard would be great, an ecosystem standard, but I think, it's going to require use cases, which I guess is my other point is I think a big thing we're seeing is a lot of people want to issue NFTs on Stellar because NFTs are a big deal. But if you look at right now in the space, and you'll see other networks, and not to name or bash any of them because I don't think there's anything wrong with it, saying you can issue stuff on ours. Here's the platform to do it. I think, people will try that stuff out, but the NFT collector, the one that people are thinking of right now, they're all on Ethereum. They all have, and I think the way that you really get people to use NFTs is through use cases. Lightment is a great, you make the game. The users just want to play the game. If the NFT is part of that experience, they can learn about how that functions as they learn that community and environment and ecosystem and platform. And I think actual use cases will bring people to networks, and they'll get NFTs through those use cases. I think that just issuing an NFT on Stellar because you want to do an NFT, but you don't want to pay $70 in gas on Ethereum, that makes logical sense, but it's not going to attract the current insanity that you're seeing in other on Ethereum around it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I wanted to get back just about because the way on the storage first for NFTs, the way I choose to approach this problem with Lightmint is basically by not addressing this problem. So essentially, I use what Steve was pointing out. There's a SEP1 specification, so Stellar Ecosystem Proposal Standard that allows us to describe an asset through a TOML file, and that's the only thing that the Lightmint marketplace will basically care about. So whether the item is stored on IPFS, whether it's stored as managed data inside the asset itself, is not something that the marketplace will address, basically. As long as your item is described properly within the TOML file, then it will be displayed properly to users on the marketplace. And I decided to use that because at the end, it's currently a standard that is used for Stellar, for describing all assets on Stellar. And this way, I don't make assumption about how an eventual standard will come later on for storing the data. Because there's also another thing that I was wondering, and is, yes, it's nice to have access to the art in a kind of a permanent way. But is it really where the value is? Because if you look at, for example, the way the first 5,000 days has been sold for 69 million, it doesn't really matter if someone gets, and you can actually get the high resolution copy on IPFS for that art. It's not what carries the value of the item. What carries the value is the fact that someone has the signature to sign a transfer transaction to pass ownership of that art. And even if tomorrow the only trace remaining of that art is a like 5x5 pixel resolution of it, I think the value would still be there because someone has the ability to sign the transaction.
I would agree with you on that point to most degree. I think, newcomers to the space, they want the art. And so when people pull things like change the art on OpenSea, like that becomes a pseudo news article because people are like, well, it's gone. But if you look and listen to the people who are doing art with Bitcoin, like colored coins or rare pepes, or like if you listen to the early Ethereum like style NFT things that have been converted, there's arguments about like, are you purchasing the ledger history, the signature, like the ownership here? If you can track the origin of like the first press, then that, and like it goes back all the way. So like even if it started on one chain and ended up somewhere, as long as you can trace all that back, I think there was an article Vitalik recently published too around a similar idea. It's like that's what you're purchasing. And I think to Fred's point about the art is like art, people are minting these pieces as art currently, but there's no reason that Beeple piece can't be like a legendary sword in somebody else's game. And in that regard, that asset is going to be represented differently. It exists on chain, so if you hold it in your wallet, you can like, it's proof of your ownership, so they can pull that from, whether that's Albedo or MetaMask or whatever you're using from like these things, or however the game interacts with these assets. So just because it was minted as art and there's an IPFS that goes along with it, doesn't mean that every application of that asset that exists has to be art related.
I agree 100%. And I think that's a really important distinction to make, particularly for the future of NFTs, even in just identifying what are people actually buying, what are they actually getting, what's the legally defensible item that you're arguing over, what's the thing that's valuable. And it's interesting because the representation, like traditionally in our brains, when we think about art, or we think about what are you getting, it is the music, it is the picture, it is, but because it's so often tied to the medium by which you got it, it's hard to separate those things out. But when you actually look at what are you selling, like if I go and I steal that image and mint it myself outside of there being copyright issues, it's not valuable because I'm not the artist. And you can prove that I'm not the artist. I didn't actually make that thing. And that's where you get into art fraud now, is you're not trying to find which one looks good. You're trying to find this artist was famous. This artist was the real deal and he painted something. We need to find that one because he actually touched it. And it's less the item and more the assurance that the person behind it, the certification that it's legitimate. That's what the blockchain gives you, not the connection to the pixels or the sound waves or whatever scratches on the hard drive might be. Like the thing that's valuable is that origination, the certificate. And I think we need to keep that in mind, particularly because I think it's extremely interesting that art might change, that as something gets purchased, it's programmed to change in a certain way over time. And we even start to represent, like, if you had, this $69 million NFT, but you could somehow load it up into a game, maybe it becomes this weird meme thing that no matter what game you're in, you can load in this NFT and it gives you superpowers. Like, that's really interesting. That's something you can't do with physical art. That would be fascinating when you start to approach what can we do with this medium that's innovation, that's something that we can only do because it's digital. There's some really fascinating things that I think we need to start exploring by moving away from assuming that people are buying pixels and instead assuming what's true is they're buying certification, they're buying something on the blockchain, they're buying their stamp, they're part of history in the chain of whatever this thing originally was, because it's actually quite simple when you get down to what is something valuable, like what makes something valuable. It's just what is someone else willing to pay for it. And so long as you can make that a large group or large amounts of money, the assurance there is on the blockchain, and that is good. That does work. That's already been proven. The attaching images to that's difficult, and there's legal issues around there. But if you can rather just have this chain of things, this chain of events and transactions and assurance of ownership, particularly originally, which you can do now, I think you've got something that you can really begin to innovate on.
Cool.
Super. Sorry, after you, Tyler.
No, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to come up, but there was just a model which I had a conversation with someone the other day. It was an interesting brainstorm. It's combining smart contracts with NFTs. It's using an NFT to represent some physical. In this case, let's take a tree. So the person I was speaking to was saying that they wanted to plant trees, and they hate these models where $1 a tree, the tree gets planted, it gets ripped up 6 months later. The question is, if you want to plant trees, you need them to be there 5-10 years to get the benefit. So that's an asset which is developing over time. It has more value the older it gets, typically. And so if you take a smart contract and you tie it to an NFT, the NFT is tied to, this case, let's just take a tree. It's probably going to be a number of trees together. And in the smart contract, you say to the donor, okay, you're going to invest $10 into this smart contract. And when you do that, you're going to get the NFT, which represents the tree. The smart contract then is where there's checks going on to look at that asset over time and put inputs into the smart contract saying, hey, tree's still here, everything's good, it's being watered. And on that basis, you've had the $10 go into the pool. Say there was $1 pushed out at the beginning to plant the tree. A year later, you have a couple more dollars goes, and it's going through to the community that's looking after these trees. So you can use a smart contract combined with an NFT. And if the tree goes, you can burn the NFT. You have a way of relating and having a long-term investment around natural assets. I think, the way I explain it is probably not that clear, but I think there's a useful way of investors being able to put money into a smart contract, NFT representation, and a long-term view. I don't know what you think, if that makes any sense at all.
It's super interesting. And I think that the issue for me becomes around how do you make assurances between something that's strictly digital and programmed and something that's very much not. Like, there has to be those reward mechanisms, kind of like what you mentioned, that like, what's to keep me from taking an axe and chopping down the trees so that I can plant another one and mint more tokens and get more money. Like, somehow you have to make it monetarily worth keeping that tree alive. And I think some of the problem is there, but I also think there's opportunities in NFT spaces or even just tokenization spaces where you can get retail investors involved, where it's not big corporations, but individuals have a tree token, and somehow there is that ability to keep tabs on what's happening. So implement economic models that make it more worth it to keep these things as long-term investments or opportunities for foresters to ensure that they're doing the right thing, that there's monetary incentives for that, because right now so much of that is flipped, where as long as it's more worth it for me to do the wrong thing, will I choose to do that more often? So we have to flip those economic models to where either there are smart contracts or legal contracts in place that disallow that or disincentivize that, or more preferably, there are economic models in place that are more worth it for you to do the right thing, that you actually earn more money that way. And those are tricky. But I think one of the reasons they're tricky is because there's so many middlemen, and so much of these investment opportunities are locked out to little bits of money who don't have large, they're not trying to make $1 million off of an investment. They're trying to make a small moral decision of, I want to do some good in the world. And it doesn't matter if my $1 makes $2 in 5 years. I just want to do some good and have some assurance that the good I want to do will actually happen. I think blockchain has a lot of potential to open up opportunities for that, for just by the nature of removing so many middlemen, because rather than having human contracts in place, you have computers. Again, it's math instead of morals that are addressing these things. And I think that's a powerful tool that we're only really starting to scratch the surface on how that moves just beyond kind of converting traditional finance to digital finance. There's some really interesting opportunities there, but they definitely remain to be seen how successful those can be over the next few years. But innovation in that space is definitely needed, and I think it's valuable to look at that.
Not to throw us a loop here, because I wonder if there's some questions available, but I also had a quick question for Fred regarding his platform that I got a sneak peek of the other day, because I think, similar to how, well, I don't know. Let me just ask the question, Fred. For your platform, like you were sharing that you had some like cross-chain kind of compatibility, and that it looks like Lightmint marketplace, you become an anchor essentially, right? Like you are an NFT anchor for Ethereum ones. Would that?
I mean, essentially during the live, I wanted to show that artists, let's say you have issued some assets on some NFTs on Ethereum. So the goal was to show how you can benefit from Stellar to alleviate all the fees, and then also still sell your art, because what people may not realize is that Stellar has actually a lot of tools for working with NFTs. So for example, you can use path payments in order to have not just cross assets exchanges, but you can also have bid and offer discoveries, which means that basically it's a very powerful tool to connect buyers and sellers. And if you are an artist on Ethereum, then Stellar is it will become a very valuable platform for the goal is to make it an alternative platform for those sellers in order to alleviate the fees. There's also another things that can run on DS DEX that people may not realize. It's for example, you can use a time-bound pre-order transaction in order to settle all the bidders and the participants in an auction at the end of an auction after a specific predetermined period. And you can also use you can use the path payment strict send at the end of the auction also to implement a reserve price and things like that. So Stellar is extremely versatile as a protocol in order to implement all those, and people need to realize that it could become a very good alternative to those networks that at the moment have a big problem with fees.
Do you see compatibility with other networks as well outside of Ethereum potentially?
No, I did not investigate more, but yeah, I think the goal is really to make it if you are an artist on Ethereum, then I want to make it that you can try Stellar as an alternative and benefit.
Sweet. I think that clarifies my my question on that.
All right. Well, I don't know if anybody has any last minute. Otherwise, we're going to open it. We have a couple of questions from our engaged and interested audience, which I would like to pose to the group. So maybe, Fred, this would be an interesting one. Any plans, and this is kind of a little bit towards SDF, or at least the Stellar side of things, but are there any plans to make non-fractionable an option in the TOML file? It'd be great to issue whole coin NFTs instead of 0.0000001. NFTs. So how are you addressing that? How do you think we should address that? There's SEP work to be done here. There's also smart contract stuff that can be done here. Some of it's just display mechanics, right, on the platform that you're displaying your NFT on, because you don't, at the end of the day, it's a display thing. But I don't know, Fred, how are you addressing the 0.00001 issue?
Yeah, so this is this has been a hurdle for developing the marketplace, because first, it's not very friendly to users, but there's also some limitation on the SDEX because of the int 32 limit. So you can't price easily an item over 214.75 of any unit. So in order to solve that, for example, what we do, we use an intermediate market. So instead of posting just one bid offer, we post two, and we issue an asset and price this asset. The problem is that it creates cryptic orders on the SDEX. So I think there's definitely a need for addressing this in order to make it clearer, to prevent the creation of those buffering assets. And yeah, that could be, after I'm not sure, my favored ways would be to go with lifting the limit of it in 32 on the SDEX. That would be my favorite way, the most natural. And then also in terms of being able to create non-fractionable assets, or fractionable at very specific decimal place, then that would be the best for Stellar.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot of different ways to address the issue. There's a lot of reasons that they are issues, whether it's selling issues on the DEX, or just visibility issues where it's weird to see that much fraction. But I will say you can issue, particularly because we have functionality around auth required flags. You could issue one of something, and then if you built a smart contract through either the Stellar Turret network, or even just a centralized service that allows people to buy and sell that asset, you would basically allow that sale of the NFT only through this one like endpoint, where it opened up authorization to whoever was purchasing it, sold that asset in an atomic swap with the operations, and then closed access. So you can absolutely do this already. It's just not incredibly natural, but it can absolutely work. I'm particularly interested in the atomic swap stuff, because that removes so much of the math issue, where you can sell 0.0000 whatever for an infinite amount of the counter asset, or the max amount of the counter asset, and not run into any math issues. It's just that, how do you create that transaction in a decentralized way where there isn't a third party that, boy, I sure hope they don't go down, or I can't move my asset. So work in that arena is something that's super interesting, and to me, and something that I'm particularly focused on. Good. Any follow-up questions around that? Otherwise, we'll move on. So here's one. I want to buy a house with a stranger. This has been historically a horrible idea. Is there any way XLM or NFTs can alleviate all of the problems with co-ownership of homes or real estate? I don't know, Steve, Zach, thoughts around co-ownership with strangers on houses?
I'll let Steve go first, or unless I'm happy to as well.
I was going to say after you, but the short answer to the question is no. I think you'll still fall out the same ways. I mean, it's there's going to be a contract of some sort between you, but maybe I'm being limited in my thinking. What do you think?
I think that NFTs can solve a lot of issues with traditional real estate. But I think one of the things, and this is a spiel that I'm working on, so I'm going to test it here, is like with all these other networks, decentralized distributed trustless systems that's the highlight, right? So like Bitcoin is trustless peer-to-peer payments, Ethereum is trustless like decentralized applications, and you can build on top of it for financial stuff. Stellar is interesting because there's this inherent requirement for trust on the network, because it tethers not only digital assets but also real world assets. And so if you take that kind of same principle to NFTs, like there will be things that exist in real life that can exist in both worlds, but you will still need to have a trust in like whatever that custodial power is. So when I'm talking about NFTs like circumvent the title company, ideally, the title companies would anchor these assets and just adapt to the space instead of be relegated out. It creates new economies for them. They could have better processes. Maybe that lowers the cost for even doing the signing table stuff. Instead of getting everybody in a room to sign, like they can just click a button and digitally transfer that. And so while you still have a record of the physical thing in their vault, you now also have a digital representation that anyone can view on Ledger. And I think that you have to have trust when it comes to real world assets, and there will always have to be a facilitator for that. But I don't think that means that you can't disrupt systems like housing. Now, with fractionalized stuff, to the question's point, you already have projects on Stellar that are doing that kind of stuff, where it's like an apartment like share, like you can fractionalize that, and that's been a big use case that I've seen. There's I think a small handful of companies doing some cool stuff with that already on the network. So that use case is proof like that can work, but that's a different model completely than like something like just I want to sell Tyler my house. Here's the title. Okay, bye. Like it can't do that. We can do it with cars for some reason though, but the government still verifies that here in the United States.
There's reinvention of systems, which is great. Yeah. I suppose I interpreted the question of, will I be able to live with the person if we use an NFT?
I may have misinterpreted it as well then.
Yeah. Depends on the use case here. Are we going to live in the house, or are we just using it as an investment? Because investment, I think there is opportunity, but if you're just buying with a random stranger on Craigslist, that's I don't know. They're still humans.
Sorry, just to comment on that, Tyler, that gets really interesting, because if you look at ownership, if you take what Zach says and you create a system where the house is kind of containerized within NFT or NFT, it'll have to be a number of NFTs, and if you can then easily split ownership, you can then take a 50th share of a house, have that as part of your investment portfolio, have everything transparent. That's interesting, and from a portfolio point of view.
Yep, I think so too. Particularly when you start again opening up to retail investors, or this idea of patronage, where you tokenize a restaurant or something, and people who like that restaurant, or when you look at art, it's not so much an investment that I hope to resell this thing. I just want to support the people that I love and the art that they do and the things that they make. There's a huge market for that. And it's not driven by greed necessarily, or at least it's not monetary greed. It's just, I like this thing and I want to see it exist and thrive. And there's a whole market out there that I think we're only beginning to really start to tap into, that has nothing to do with me getting rich and more me enriching the artists and creators that I love. So we need to close out here. This has been a fantastic conversation. One last question here. For those who are not developers or people that maybe more on the art side of things, this would be a good question perhaps for Fred. How can they get involved? How can we start issuing art and music and begin to take advantage of marketplaces like what you're building, Fred? When are we going to get access? What's the plan for the future? For non-developers, what's the path forward?
So it's going to be live very soon. I'm just fixing the last details, especially about stress testing and security, because we have created some kind of contracts with pre-hold transactions. Just want to make sure that there's no issues with this. And this is going to be live on lightning.com. On the website, you will have tools to create, and without any programming required, to issue your asset on Stellar. So just need to specify the art, and if you want to, you can store it on IPFS, you can store it somewhere else. And also, we are also going to run an anchor for you. So there will be a review, you will be able to issue your assets without any technical knowledge.
Fantastic. Very excited. Well, thank you all. I don't know if there's any closing thoughts, comments.
I mean, I only have two closing things. Kind of one, the first to bounce off of Fred. I think there's, I think keep an eye out for that. I'm eager to experiment with it after seeing it. There's also others, I think, around the ecosystem already that you can play around with that do it, like we're trying, I think, account-based NFTs. And I don't have the URLs off the top of my head, but I'm sure you can like dig around a little bit if you're part of the Stellar community. What I would say to do is that if you want to see more NFT projects on Stellar, get involved in the conversations on the dev group about it, and like start talking to other people that are developing NFT-based projects, so some standards can get uniform across. So these different things can begin to interpret the same, like different assets that are published the same way. That would be my closing statement.
Yep. Yep, absolutely. Stellar Global, find us on Discord and start the discussion. That's a great place to land. I don't know if anybody wants to call out where they can keep up with you and the work that you're doing, and then we will close out. Steve, if you want to start where people can keep track of the work that you're doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Come and say hello at task.io. I'd like to be on Twitter. I'm at Steve Walker without an E at the end. So Steve, WALKR. And great to connect, and really appreciate you inviting me in today. It's been a great experience. Thank you.
Super. Yep. It's been great to have you. Fred.
And same, if you want to connect with the project, you can come and join our community. We have a Discord community, over 1,000 members, lightning.gg. You can type in your browser and you will get the invite link. And then I'm there almost every day to talk. So if you have any questions, just don't hesitate.
And Zach, where can people pester you?
You guys can tag at stellar.org on Twitter, and I will see every single thing that you have ever pasted there multiple times. And yeah, and then also, the regular places, Keybase.
All right, super. And once again, I'm Tyler Vanderhoeven. You can find me TYVDH on Twitter. That's the best place to find me. I also do hang out on Discord occasionally. This has been a ton of fun. Thank you all for joining. We will catch you later, hopefully conversing around art.
Right. Thank you very much.
See you all.
Thank you.